Everybody. My name is Barry Whaley. I'm the director of the Southeast ADA Center. Southeast ADA Center is a project of the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. I want to thank you for joining us for this final of 4 virtual events, Future Images of the Face of Vocational Rehabilitation. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We're glad you're here. If you've been around for the other 2 webinars and the podcast, welcome back. We're happy that you've joined us today. October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and for this year, 2020, our theme is Increasing Access and Opportunity. This year is also the 75th anniversary of NDEAM, National Disability Employment Awareness Month. NDEAM is led by the U.S. Department of Labor, Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP. During 2020, we're also celebrating the 30th anniversary of the ADA, and we're also celebrating the 100th anniversary of vocational rehabilitation. So in recognition of these important milestones, the Southeast ADA Center has been hosting this 4-event virtual series, Disability Employment, Looking Back and Moving Forward, each Wednesday in October. This webinar is a final tribute to National Disability Employment Awareness Month. The first 100 years of VR and the 30th anniversary of the ADA, we want to welcome a panel of VR's innovative leaders who are going to discuss issues around racial equity, service delivery design, employer engagement, and reasonable accommodations, technology, transition services, statewide workforce system integration. This webinar will also cover future emerging issues and challenges and trends in the public vocational rehabilitation program. So it is truly a pleasure for me to introduce our guests for today. Cora McNabb. Cora is the Director of Kentucky Vocational Rehabilitation. Joe Xavier, the Director of California Vocational Rehabilitation. Felicia Johnson, the Commissioner of South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation. And finally, David Dukas, the Director of the Connecticut Bureau of Rehabilitation Services. And we're very pleased to have as a host for this webinar today, Allison Flanagan. Allison is the Director of the Florida Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, and she is the President of CSAVR, the Council of State Administrators of Vocational Rehabilitation. So again, welcome everybody, and Allison, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Barry, and the Southeast ADA for continuing the conversation of disability employment. It's great to see my colleagues from the other parts of the country here today to share their wisdom and future thoughts regarding the public vocational rehabilitation program. For anyone who isn't familiar, the Public VR program, it's a state federal program that assists individuals with disabilities to obtain employment. There are 78 public VR agencies in the country, and that includes the territories. The Public VR program assists about 1.4 million individuals with disabilities a year. And while all disabilities that create an impediment to employment may meet our eligibility criteria, on a national view, about 33% of the VR customers are those with mental health disorders. About 31% of customers have intellectual or developmental disabilities and learning disabilities. Then about 20% make up the physical disabilities, 11% are auditory or communication disorders, and about 5% are individuals with visual impairments. One of the most amazing aspects of the VR approach is the individualized services. And VR truly lives by the saying, no 2 individuals are the same. And their unique circumstances allows VR to provide the most valuable services to help them succeed in their competitive integrated employment search. This has certainly been an extraordinary year with the pandemic, and I know everybody has definitely felt the pandemic this year, and there's been a lot of changes made in the public VR program to make sure our services continue for our customers. States have had to make quick programmatic changes, moving to a virtual delivery of services, and continuing to work with our stakeholders as well as our customers to continue that services that will lead them to employment. Today, as Barry said, my expert panel will share their thoughts and approaches to service delivery and the staff challenges and the workforce partnership and employer engagement. I know it will be a good conversation and hope it gives everyone some thought to think about future changes. Panel, we are going to rotate through the questions, and I will ask each of you to respond to a question I pose, but then each of you will have an opportunity to respond after the first one answers the question. So I hope we have some good dialogue, and it'll probably benefit our audience the most if we just have discussions back and forth. So panel, are we ready to begin?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, Cora, I'm going to start with you. Sorry, I had to find where I was at. So we're going to start the first question talking about service delivery and how that's changed, especially with the pandemic and everything that's happened this year so far. So when you think about in the future, what and how do you expect the lessons that we've learned during this pandemic and how to impact our customers interact and engage with VR services? How do you see this shaping up in the future?
Well, I think at the forefront in Kentucky, the lessons learned deal with technology and then simply how individuals will access employment services moving forward. We know that technology has allowed many people in the world, across the country, and in our states to work from home and to stay at home, but not everybody has had the benefit of that technology, and certainly not many of the individuals that we serve, individuals with disabilities. So many of the states have worked to improve the lives of individuals with disabilities through different initiatives focused on employment, and Kentucky has done that through its Employment First initiative. But for sure, I think with us, the onset of COVID-19, our leadership recognized how important for us moving forward is to make sure we're more prepared at the onset of a pandemic or any other major occurrence that happens. I know that we were not as prepared as we should have been for the abrupt switch that we faced in service delivery. Typically we have been face-to-face, in-person services, and we had to switch to virtual platforms. We weren't prepared for that, and I feel like many of the individuals we serve were not prepared for that. And so the changes that occurred in service delivery had a major impact on our staff and the people we serve. Communication's been a challenge, providing information that's accessible by phone, email, our websites, all the platforms and modalities that we used. It also presented us with many questions on how we were going to ensure that individuals with disabilities had access to the employment services. It's had a big impact on how we work, and going forward, I think, all the states have experienced the effects on our community-based organizations and their ability to provide services. So I don't know that as yet we know exactly how the pandemic is going to affect the labor market long term. And I've heard a lot of discussions around automation and will it change the way that service delivery occurs moving forward. And then on top of that, you add all the internal processes of making sure we're able to process authorizations electronically, obtain signatures, and informed choice came to the forefront in making sure that we give individuals the information that they need about services, their right to services and the risk of COVID. So I think those are the two things that I would identify as the most important: technology and just making sure that individuals can access those ongoing employment services.
Definitely some excellent points there. I mean, technology has proven to be, a great benefit, especially during this pandemic. But like you said, a lot of the state VR agencies were not quite ready to go into the 100% virtual world, so we did have to switch very quickly. Joe, David, Felicia, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, this is Joe. A couple thoughts that I would just add to this is, we have the impact, of course, that Cora's already talked about on the people that we serve, but it's also created some opportunities and frankly forced some escalation of some things that, at least for us, might have taken, 5, 10, 15 years. And so we have had to become much more nimble than we ever thought government could do. And so I think one good thing is that we know we can be nimble. Now, how do we stay with it? For us here, a couple things in California that I would point out is that shifting to this virtual approach of delivering services has enabled us to reach populations and reach them in ways that, perhaps they were not being connected before. And so in some programs, we're seeing greater participation because transportation is no longer that barrier that it might have been. That method of engaging is a little more conducive to a particular individual. But the other thing that I would say is that our systems have had to change and change very quickly. So 3 things that I would point to that I think will survive post-COVID-19 and be very beneficial. Cora mentioned electronic signatures. So we're not only changing electronic signatures, we're changing our whole mindset around signature. It's really not signature. It's frankly authentication of the individual, much like what we all do with our banking or online retail work that we do. We don't sign anything. We just authenticate who we are. And that's a nuance that's important because we're still stuck on ink to paper, and it's really going to move beyond that. Second is just thinking about how we deliver services to the consumer. We are in the process of shifting to use of debit cards instead of paper checks or bank drafts as a way of a consumer procuring those things that are appropriate for them to procure. And then finally, in the long term, telework. We were trying to push the telework for 4 years and did not make the progress that we were able to make in 4 weeks. And so we expect that long term, upwards of 75% of our staff will be in telework status. That has a lot of implications across not only service delivery, but the quality of life for our staff as well. So I'll stop my comments there, Allison.
Thank you, Joe. And a lot of similarities there, in which I know a lot of the state VR programs are going to move towards more of a permanent telework type approach. It's been beneficial during this pandemic for at least the staff here in Florida. And I know, Joe, in California, you've said the same thing. We've seen a lot of productivity, a lot of creativity as well during the virtual approach of services. But the challenges you mentioned, like the pen and paper signatures that a lot of the agencies are still looking, backwards at, we do have to keep moving forward and trying to align ourselves with what, the business practices are in our country right now. Let's move on to the next question, please. David, I'll start off with you on this one. A critical topic today is equality in all aspects of our lives, and this certainly includes equality for individuals with disabilities. An important emphasis for the future of VR services is equality for those services to individuals with disabilities and working to address institutional bias that exists within programs. David, what changes or additions do you see in terms of current and future efforts to maintain equality?
Well, thank you, Allison. I think that In Connecticut, we have had about a decade or longer history of attempting to really address the inequality issue. It was recognized by us quite some time ago, where we were not receiving or achieving the same outcomes with individuals from minority backgrounds that we were with non-minorities. And we really tried to get at that for a very long time. We started with staff surveys, lots of discussions internally trying to figure out what the discrepancy was and where its roots were. We moved on based on some of the input we had from our staff to numerous trainings on multiculturalism and bias. And even with that level of education, we still really weren't impacting the outcomes the way that we had hoped for. Over the more recent years, we've contracted with the National Coalition of Community Justice and had them provide some very intense training for our staff. What really grew out of that was a recognition that institutional bias, no matter of our best efforts to try to not allow that to influence us, truly does permeate through our organization and through the services that we deliver. So we've been attempting to address that. As it relates to services for consumers, the improving services and outreach to minority communities is one of our state plan goals. We have been focused on that in recent years and have been attempting to improve our infrastructure so that we could be able to outreach more effectively and serve these individuals more effectively. Infrastructure in terms of trying to mitigate any communication barriers that may exist, in particular with our high incidence of Spanish-speaking populations here in Connecticut, as well as trying to outreach to some of our urban centers with a high incidence of minorities. Where we're headed in the future with this, and possibly the most important part around the infrastructure, is the training of our counseling staff. And we've been working with a college professor who is a subject matter expert in the area of institutional bias and racism. He's worked with us over the past 3 to 6 months and has interviewed numerous counseling staff and has worked with us to develop a plan on how to address this. The areas of focus that we consider essential to building the infrastructure necessary to be able to outreach to these populations and work with them effectively, there's 5 major areas. And one is building cultural awareness. And that's really providing counselors with the ability to consider ways that his or her own culture and race shape their own attitudes about minority consumers. This includes identifying the root of common stereotypes and the ways in which these stereotypes negatively impact our ability to be effective vocational rehab counselors. Second is around building cultural knowledge. And that's where we'll provide counselors with basic knowledge about, in particular, African American and Latino history and culture. Third is developing cultural skills. We use our awareness and knowledge in order to increase our ability to evaluate a consumer and develop a plan that takes their culture into consideration. Fourth is cultural encounters. We'll focus on various specific racially charged encounters in order to work towards effective ways of negotiating these challenging situations. Our experience has been that these cultural encounters not only can occur with our consumers as we're attempting to serve them, but also between our own staff ourselves. And last is very important, which is cultural desire. And the key to that is cultivating a desire, both professionally and personally, that motivates us towards challenging and confronting racism and bias. I can say that over this last 10 to 15 years, it's been a personal journey for me. And it's something that I'm very invested in. And I think that the future of our VR program rests with trying to offer equal access to individuals, no matter of their background.
A lot of great things happening, David, in Connecticut. Thank you for sharing that. I'm very impressed with, just the work you're doing with that outside educator. And I think all of the states, we've made a conscious effort to really look at our programs and, where do we have inequality, because we certainly don't want that happening. And allowing us to take a deeper dive into our data, into the customers that we're serving and looking at areas. And, you know, I know Florida is a very diverse state, and actually was a little bit surprised, even though we have a lot of diversity, I was a little surprised at the lack of, I guess, positive outcomes for our minority populations. So certainly something we have to work on here in Florida. And those things that you mentioned, you know, the cultural awareness, I think all of that is key for our staff to make sure that we're providing quality services no matter who the individual is coming in. You know, California, South Carolina, Kentucky, anything you all are doing to address the equality issues within your states right now?
Allison, this is Felicia. Very impressive information from David and what they're doing. And I hope that we can move in a similar direction to bring in some outside assistance. But we have taken the steps to start looking at our outcomes and our service provision and collecting data to do some comparisons to see where we may have issues and concerns that need to be addressed. We've already identified that, you know, our outcomes for our minority populations do tend to take a little longer, and they may not be let's say all of the individuals' transferable skills may not always be considered in the types of outcomes that their successful closure ends up in. So we are collecting data to take a look at that. We do realize that, and you know, to be honest with you, it's not anything that we've ever looked at up until recent times. But you know, with everything going on in our country, it's bringing things to the forefront that you may have never considered could possibly be an issue, and then you take a little deeper dive and you see that, yeah, there is something here that maybe we can take a closer look at, because we want to make sure we're being fair and consistent. So we are taking those steps. We're just getting started, but I hope to one day be able to go down the road that David and the team in Connecticut are doing to really take some measures to address it and be effective and intentional in how we address the concerns.
Thank you, Felicia and David. You know, the topic of equality is circling probably all businesses, and state government is included as well. And our Council of State Administrators for BEAG-R has been working diligently on not just an equality statement, but they're taking it a step further and looking at action steps. And that conversation will be continuing next month through the fall conference, and looking forward to what action steps the public VR programs identified in order to increase our equality for all individuals in the country. So let's move on. The community rehabilitation providers, they assist the state VR programs with the services needed to assist our customers. Many of our CRP providers provide vocational evaluation services, job development, job placement services, support employment. That's some of the examples that our CRP partners provide, and they're very critical to us for our service delivery. Felicia, I'll start with you on this one. The issue of staff retention or attrition is a well-known long-term concern related to the community rehabilitation providers and other vendors that are so critical to the service delivery models of the state VR agencies. With the onset of COVID-19, this issue obviously has been heightened. So how is your state addressing this ongoing issue with our CRP community?
Okay, well, I'll start with making a comment about our staff attrition. Because as it states in the question, the question there, that, you know, our staff build relationships with our partners in the community, and it sometimes causes a lapse in service delivery or a lapse in communication when you have employees that are the point of contact for a certain provider, and that employee is no longer with the agency. So about 10 years ago, we started to notice that we were losing counselors at a more rapid rate. And I have a little saying that, you know, if you can work at VR, you can work anywhere. And I think what was happening is, you know, we were getting good employees and training them up real well, and they were going on to do other things. So it got me to thinking when I became the commissioner in South Carolina, is basically, are we being realistic to think that folks are going to come to state government and work for, you know, 25, 30 years and retire? Or do we need to really shift our mindset and prepare ourselves for the fact that staff will continue to, you know, come and go and stay with us on an average of 5 or so years, and maybe go on to do other things? So we put together a focus group probably about 3 years ago with employees that had been with VR 3 years or less, because we wanted to be realistic in our planning for the future, and also figure out what could we do to better attract employees to the agency, to make VR a place where folks wanted to come to work. And I put this question to the work group. I said, and am I unrealistic to not just want you to come to work here, but to want you to stay here for, you know, more than 5 years? And the feedback that we received, this was a younger group of folks. I would consider them all millennials. And the feedback that we received was that, and I think studies showed this as well, that they wanted a purpose and a feeling of belonging. They looked for opportunities that they could have a purpose, have a sense of belonging, make a difference, add value. However, they weren't of the mindset to think about retiring so early in their careers. So we started to look at ways to make VR more attractive. We started to focus on training and making folks, or helping folks to enhance their skills while they were at the agency, working on different career paths, to help folks see that there are different things that you can do within the agency. You may come here as a counselor, but there are other opportunities. We revamped our leadership development program, so to help folks not just learn about how to be a leader, but also this program gives them opportunities to shadow folks in different positions, so that they can see if that's really what they want to aspire to do within the agency. We put a real focus on that because we wanted to even if folks didn't stay with VR while they were here, we want them to make sure they have a sense of belonging. They feel they understand the purpose, the mission, the vision, and the values of our agency. And we also revamped our new employee orientation program so that it's very clear what we do at VR, why you're here, and whether your position is the commissioner or the groundskeeper, that you matter, and this is why. So those are the efforts that we put in place to address our concerns with employee retention and attrition. And also, you know, just started to, from the executive level, just start to be realistic about the fact that, you know, we're going to have staff turnover, and we've got to prepare for that. So how do you prepare when you have a counselor that serves, you know, a school district, and that counselor leaves the agency? Who's going to serve those students? Who's going to make contact with those partners within the school to make sure that there's still a line of communication and their needs are being met? So those are some of the things that we put in place to address that issue. The next here, community rehabilitation providers. South Carolina is set up just a little bit different than some other states. We don't contract out very much at all. We handle everything in-house. So we have our own vocational evaluators. We have our own drug and alcohol rehabilitation center. We have our own comprehensive evaluation center. But we recently started to contract vendors for pre-ed services. And what we noticed during the pandemic is two things. The first, that are the folks that we contracted with to help provide some of these services really depended on us for funding. And so we had to figure out how we could continue to help them so that they could maintain their operation in this new virtual climate. And it was really difficult. It was really difficult. But what we did was we worked with them to help them understand our regulations and what it is that we can and can't do, what we can and can't pay for, what we needed from them. And they also communicated what they needed from us. And we had to develop new agreements and go through the proper channels to make sure that we could still work with these providers so that our consumers could receive those services, but we weren't in violation of any things that were, any regulations that were set in place. So it's all about communication and partnerships when you're working with your providers and your vendors. You've got to, get on the same page and make sure that, we all have the same goal, and it's to serve the consumer. So what do you need from VR? What do we need from you? And how can we work together to make sure that our consumer is reaping the benefits from our partnership in a way that's going to be helpful for them and within the parameters that we both have set for our organization. And those are just a couple of things we've done here regarding staff retention in our community rehab providers.
Thank you, Felicia. A lot of hard work you're doing there. Staff attrition is always a challenge, I think, for all the VR agencies. I still like to hang on to the fact, when the 1973 Rehab Act passed, there was a big influx in this career choice. And I remember in Kentucky, there were undergrad rehab counseling programs, and there's not any undergrad rehab counseling programs in Kentucky anymore. There was only one master's program. So when you think about 1973 and the number of individuals that went into the field of VR, a lot of them have reached that retirement age and have been leaving. And the younger folks are entering other fields other than VR. So it's certainly a challenge for us. Felicia talked about staff attrition, but also the CRP attrition. And Joe, with your big, gigantic state in California, before I throw this question to you, would you care to share with everybody about how many staff you employ in VR there in California?
Yeah, so we have about 2,000 staff in VR here in California. And so a couple things that I would add to what Felicia already shared. One is, I think that if there's a positive to come out of COVID-19 and the nimbleness that I referred to earlier. So one of the things, for example, is we're becoming much more adaptable and comfortable with video. And so our staff now, or potential staff, can interview virtually, which can really minimize the cost that they would have out of pocket to interview for a job, especially in the state the size of California. You might need to get on a plane to go to an interview. And so that, I think that's beneficial. The other one is the nimbleness in terms of providing like telework opportunities, much more flexible schedules, and is particularly beneficial for our younger workforce, where they have kids and whatnot. And then the third thing that I think has helped us a little bit is we've shifted to a team approach in delivering services. So it's not that you don't need to know both how to get somebody ready for a job and how to help them find a job. You still need both, but now that you have a team approach to that, your knowledge and your experience can be a little more one-sided and still allow you to be effective at engaging. So just a few things there that contribute to how we engage, our keeping our workforce. I think on the provider side, the other thing that I would point out is business models are changing. And so as these business models have changed, they're going to change even more with this new COVID-19 and post-COVID-19. So one of the things that we're having to take a hard look at when we do a fee for a service, the question that we have to be asking ourselves, what are we asking for in that fee? And how much burden are we placing on the provider, and is that burden commensurate with the fee we're paying? And then how do we address things like volume of referrals as well as no-shows? So if a partner is banking on somebody showing up for a service and they're not getting paid for that, that becomes an impact on their financial abilities as well. So there's a lot of moving pieces there. I don't think there's any magic answers to them, but I think we're all challenged to look at all that and find ways to stabilize and keep our business partners moving forward as well.
Thank you, Joe. David and Cora, do you have anything additional you want to add that's happening in your states, whether it's staff retention or CRP staff retention?
I'll comment a little bit on Felicia's comments about the need for training and really working with the newer staff that begin with your agency. We've recently been through an effort to implement a developmental milestone check-in for counselors as they start with our agency. This was born out of losing roughly 25% of our counseling staff over a 2-year period to attrition. Staff were jumping from VR and heading off to private rehabilitation, school systems, other social service agencies, and we had a really big exodus of talent. And exit interviewing, what we were able to identify was that a lot of these staff, although they really cared about the consumers they were working with, closely adhered to the mission and the vision of Voc Rehab, they didn't believe that they were getting the foundation that they needed to be able to thrive in the job over time. And in all honesty, they had really some issues with how they were treated in the first year of working here, where they would start and be handed a caseload and often left to their own devices to a certain extent. Although supervisors were engaged, there was the day-to-day operation of trying to manage a caseload and not feeling confident in what they were doing. The scope and breadth and depth of a Voc Rehab counselor's job is enormous. When you really pick it apart and you look at all of the different things that you need to know to function effectively based on who may be walking through your door, it's a difficult job to wrap your head around and to learn. So we took the time and made the effort to develop a month-by-month developmental milestone approach to onboarding new staff as they join us. And that's only been in place for about a year or so, but we have had a big drop-off in losing staff. And the newer staff are now feeling a lot more confident, and we're hoping that bears some fruit downstream. So I think that was one of the biggest things that we've done around internal attrition. With our community rehab providers, in Connecticut, we're heavily reliant upon contracted vendors to act as CRPs. And the average length of stay of an individual working for a CRP is 16 months. When you consider Felicia's comment earlier about the relationships that are necessary with these contracted vendors in order to work effectively with the consumer, having that kind of turnover is really difficult for our program, and we lose a lot of institutional knowledge on our contracted vendor side in working with our system. So we've been taking the approach of utilizing a distance learning platform to be able to make available to CRPs some onboarding training that'll assist them in learning how to work with us. But that's really about managing attrition. Getting to the root cause is a whole different story. And the root cause really, in speaking directly with many of the leaders in the CRP community, is really about the reimbursement. As we all know, working in VR, we have a finite amount of resources that we're able to apply to expending towards community rehab providers. I think the real trick here is going to be looking at how do we do this a little bit smarter, and maybe develop ways that we can pay more per hour or more per service to the CRP, so that they're able to reimburse staff at a higher level, but at the same time reduce the number of hours of specific service through better, higher quality service provision. So that's really what we're exploring right now. We anticipate we may go out with a competitive procurement to address those types of changes in the coming year or two. But it's a major issue for us, and one we really need to be aggressive in trying to solve.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, David. You sound like you've got a really good handle on, you've implemented a lot of really good things, but then you've also got a good handle on what you know you need to do down in the future. It's definitely a challenge for all the states, keeping that balance with our CRP providers, because we certainly couldn't do our job without them, but also keeping our staff. I will take a few minutes to do a public service announcement, and I feel like all my panelists will agree. Anyone out there interested in going to the human services field and specifically vocational rehabilitation, we are always looking for passionate, qualified staff to come work for us. Anything else you would like to add on the PSA panel?
Here, here.
Yeah, agreed.
Yes.
Let's switch it up a little bit. Cora, let's talk about our workforce partners. Service delivery design has changed when WIA with more emphasis on the statewide workforce system integration. What has changed in Kentucky, and what challenges and successes are you expecting in the future with planning and providing VR services with our workforce partners?
Well, I think over the past 10 years, Kentucky has experienced major changes to its workforce state system. And really, prior to the passing of WIOA in 2014, Kentucky already had taken a very proactive approach to systems change and full integration of the partners that included vocational rehabilitation. And over the years, we've experienced growing pains and, multiple challenges, but we've also had a lot of success. We have been involved at the table in the development of service delivery policies and procedures. And I think we've certainly made a lot of progress in moving from being more of a standalone operation outside of the workforce system to working closely with the workforce partners. I think the greatest challenges sometimes take place based on the fact of where you sit, structurally in a state. In our state, we sat in the Department of Workforce, and they had a goal to have all the workforce agencies together, even including adult ed under the workforce system. And sometimes that makes it easier, sometimes it doesn't. And often we would find ourselves in meetings where they would look at DOL guidance and the TEGLs, but they would forget that we had another oversight agency and regulatory guidance. Recently, I think it's been very helpful that joint guidance has come out between the Department of Labor and the Rehab Services Administration that addresses things. And obviously we are integrated in the comprehensive centers across the state, and we've had field staff in the field with the boots on the ground that have had to work through those service delivery issues that have been difficult in some instances, finding the balance where you're effectively collaborating and streamlining the programs, yet you maintain the integrity of the VR program. Assuring that VR money touches VR consumers and balancing those staff duties, assuring the demands for service delivery do not cross the lines. We've been in some heated discussions about covering the front desk and being the frontline person in our career centers. Infrastructure agreements have been a definite challenge and an ongoing issue in assuring that costs are reasonable and allocable, and that continues. We've had a lot of success. Like I said, our regional managers serve on the local boards, and I, in my role as executive director, sit on the state workforce board. So we have a voice in the system to advocate for individuals with disabilities. I think some of our greatest success has come through 2 grants that we have had. We just closed out the 5-year career pathway grant that ended on September 30th. And that grant was really instrumental in developing relationships in a couple of the local workforce areas with the partners. Through that grant, we actually contracted with 2 of the local workforce areas, and they became the employer of record of 6 career pathway coordinators throughout the state. And that really integrated services in the comprehensive centers where we had individuals that took advantage of many of the different service facets. The other grant that we currently have is in the Department of Workforce in Kentucky. OVR is the lead on one of the 8 nationwide retain grants, which is a demonstration grant through DOL that develops strategies for stay at work and return at work for individuals who've sustained an illness or injury off the job. It's funded through the Department of Labor and specifically ODEP and the Social Security Administration. And this is a grant that we're working with multiple state partners on in order to facilitate the project. Recently in Kentucky, we went through another reorganization that actually moved unemployment insurance and the other workforce programs, Wagner, Pizer, Vets, Trade, and Farm Worker, into the Labor Cabinet. So they've now split the workforce programs between 2 cabinets. So we're not really sure how that is all going to come together. So currently we're undergoing another transformation of how the service delivery will look in the state. But certainly at this time, Voc Rehab has a large footprint in all of the career centers across the state.
Thank you, Cora. What is a virtual session if someone forgets to unmute themselves when they need to talk, right? Thank you for that updating. A lot of things have been happening in Kentucky as far as the workforce partners go. A lot of good work. David, Joe, or Felicia, do any of you all want to add anything about your relationship with your workforce partners and what's working well in your states?
Yeah, Allison, this is Joe. One thing that I would share here that we have found to be very beneficial. We partnered with a number of our workforce boards for student services. And so we've asked them to provide the paid work experience for students. And that has turned out to be an invaluable effort. Not only are the youth getting that actual work experience that is so very meaningful, but because the workforce boards, workforce centers are playing a more integral role in that, their awareness and their engagement with youth with disabilities, you can just see it changing the belief that youth with disabilities can and will go to work. And that has some real cascading implications. So we have found that to be an invaluable partnership that we're looking to continue and to expand on.
Great, thank you, Joe. Let's keep moving on. Let's talk about pre-employment transition services. So when WIOA passed in 2014, one of the biggest changes was the introduction of the pre-employment transition services, which is specifically for students with disabilities. And it further emphasized the transition services as ways to provide a career development approach for the youth to understand and identify their employment interests and to enter advanced and competitive integrated employment. So I know since 2014, all the state VR agencies have been working diligently to make sure that we implement the pre-employment transition services portion of WIOA. That's probably been one of our biggest challenges with WIOA, but it has also developed a lot of benefits. So, David, I'll start with you. What challenges and strengths have you seen in your state, and what do you see in the future related to the pre-employment transition services?
Sure, Allison. I'm going to go back to when I was a counselor some 20 some odd years ago. For the record, I started with Voc Rehab when I was 7 years old. We have in Connecticut a very strong belief in transition. Our former director was on the cutting edge of really trying to embed our counseling staff inside of school systems. We were actually able to co-locate certain staffs right inside some of our major schools. And it was a belief that we had that early intervention was the key to long-term success for these kids. And I think I grew up in a culture within this program that really emphasized that, and we've continued it on through the years. When WIOA introduced pre-employment transition services, it was not really a huge philosophical leap for us to implement that. It was more of a logistical leap that all of us in VR have had to deal with the challenges around the way the legislation is worded. But the commitment to the youth population is something that is definitely a strength here. Through that commitment, we've had great relationships with our State Department of Education and many of the schools around the state. That existing for many years has positioned us well to be able to work with the population. That being said, not every school district is the same, and personnel changes, and oftentimes, much like with CRPs, when a person who's a champion of our cause leaves a school, our relationship terminates and we have to begin again. And sometimes we're successful in that effort and sometimes we're not. So that's really one of the big challenges that we have is identifying the champion. And it can come from a lot of different places. It can be a special ed coordinator. It can be a special ed teacher. It can be the school nurse. It can be an administrator. It can just be a random teacher who has a student and will introduce us to their entire system. Another challenge that we have here is really a drop-off between pre-employment transition students entering the adult services world of VR. As a child graduates high school, we have a higher percentage of loss of those who we fail to engage with us as an adult. And we're really trying to get at that through some of the efforts we have going right now. And we're trying to analyze and develop strategies to mitigate the problem. Another thing that we're really studying, we've contracted recently with our State Education Resource Center. And they're going to do resource mapping for us in Connecticut down to a very granular level. We want to be able to identify local education, by each local education authority, what schools are providing for transition services through their programs, and how do we augment that through the use of our pre-employment transition services program. Again, all those two schools are really alike. Their transition programs are not mandated to have certain components here in Connecticut. They're able to develop them how they see fit. And with that in mind, we have to meet each school system where they are and provide services that will fill gaps as opposed to replicating and causing redundancy in what we're offering to students. So I think that's one of the big challenges moving ahead, and trying to adjust our programming around that so that we can fill gaps as opposed to becoming redundant.
A lot of good things that you're doing, though, but I think one of the big key steps in order to keep moving forward is identifying those challenges, which you are doing an excellent job, so that you can make the changes necessary so that it becomes a strength instead of a challenge. But you're definitely doing a lot of good things. I know in Florida, we are working with all of the school districts and have set up work-based learning experience with them. So a benefit on this is that VR is paying the school district our rate for work-based learning experience for students with disabilities. So the school is able to actually obtain some additional dollars, which is definitely beneficial for them. And that's been a good thing for us and allowed us to make sure that we're working with all 67 school districts in the state of Florida. Cora, Felicia, Joe, anything you would like to add on your pre-employment transition services and any of the challenges and strengths you have in your states?
In Kentucky, I feel like we have a lot of really good providers of services. We've had some of the similar challenges that David mentioned. We've had a lot of success with STEM camps that we have done, and it has been very moving to see, especially in the rural areas in Appalachian, Kentucky, and the EKSEP area. I would say that's been some of our great success stories. As well, we have developed some specialized services for individuals that are deaf-blind. We have a partnership with the University of Kentucky, and that has been something that we've worked really hard to establish and develop with them, as well as Allison, you probably remember the Insight program at Moorhead University. So we've tried to reach out to some of those populations that are underserved, as well as in the school system. We have, during COVID, it's been difficult for the schools. Many of ours do not have children in the seats in the school system. They don't have students, and a lot of them are still doing virtual services. So it's been a very challenging year in that respect, and the schools are right there along with us developing those remote services for students.
Thank you, Cora. Joe or Felicia, anything to add on pre-EPS?
Lots of dittos.
Yeah, I know, right? The one thing I have learned through any of these national discussions that we've had a lot during the pandemic, just because we needed to rely on each of the states to help us navigate through some of our challenges. But it's always been refreshing when we hear from our colleagues that they are also challenged with the same things that we are. It's not unique to each state, but we seem to have a lot of the same issues that we all are working through. So let's talk about assistive technology. Assistive technology services and devices are just increasing the way more VR consumers are able to participate in employment. And, it can be an incredible service for many of our customers, and it kind of levels out that playing field when someone has assistive technology to allow them to do the same tasks that their non-disabled peers may do. So Felicia, I'll start with you. What challenges do you see to meet the demands of rapidly advancing changes and increased need for these services?
Yeah. Oop, am I muted? Okay, no, I'm not muted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, assistive technology and technology in itself has been such a blessing, especially with working with our consumer population. Like you just stated, it gives them a level playing field. And in South Carolina, it's a big part of what we do in working with our consumers. We are fortunate enough to have our own rehabilitation technology division. We have rehab engineers who their good job is to stay up on the latest assistive technology so they can make appropriate recommendations to our consumers so that they are prepared to compete on a level playing field with job applicants who do not have some of the barriers that they face. So what we do in South Carolina is we are very well connected with our state's assistive technology network. Our rehab engineers, they attend trainings, they are in the network, they are always testing the latest technology or reading up on it, going to any kind of showcases they can, so that we know what's out there and what's available for our consumers in order to help them address some of the barriers that they face when it comes to employment, and not just employment, but in everyday living with their ADLs, in their communities, in schools, so forth and so on. So we do have a heightened focus on assistive technology through our rehab engineers, but it can't just stop there, because if our rehab engineers, they may know what's out there for our consumers, but if the counselors and the job readiness preparedness instructors and the vocational evaluators and the job coaches, if they don't know what's available, then they have a gap in serving our consumers effectively. So in addition to staying on top of the latest and greatest types of technology out there to benefit folks with disabilities that we serve, we also have to make sure that that information is shared throughout the agency. So our rehab engineers do what they can to share that information, but we've also made sure that we are communicating through our internal intranet that we have within the agency, so that our staff can look at a video and see, you know, this is a new communication tool that may help someone with auditory challenges. Try to communicate as effectively as we can to our staff, so that they know, in working with their consumers, they can offer them or discuss different resources that may be available to them to help address some of the challenges that they face. So training is definitely needed, so that you know what's out there to make those recommendations and work with your consumers. But the other part of this question too is employer acceptance. You know, in part of building relationships with employers and business partners in the community, to work with VR, to give our consumers a chance and to prove that our consumers are just as good, if not better, than anyone else applying for some of those same positions. You know, sometimes we have to show them how these technologies can assist them in meeting their needs as well. I did mention when answering my first question that South Carolina is set up a little bit differently than other states. We're fortunate enough to have job readiness training centers at all of our locations throughout the state. And in these centers, we often bring employers in to see, you know, what our consumers are able to do. We can also bring our rehab engineers in with an employer and a consumer, so that they can see how things can be set up in our facility, and that shows the employer, you know, what could possibly be done at their location, because we get a lot of concerns about liability. Well, what if I, you know, bring this person in? What if they hurt themselves? Or what if they can't keep up the pace? Or what if they, you know, don't hear the fire alarm if there's a fire drill? And a lot of times you may run into someone who may not be accepting of you making changes in their business, or you have an employee that gets something different from the rest of the employees. So educating employers and sometimes showing them a visual or a hands-on example helps them to accept the assistive technology, and if they can see how not only does it help this consumer perform the job, but how it could also help their business to benefit. The last part of your question is cost of the devices. That's always a challenge. It is always a challenge. You know, we try very hard to budget. You know, prior approval kind of helps with that. You have to kind of forecast what your needs are going to be potentially, but you know, we try to budget for the cost of these new devices. We look at cost-effective ways of doing things instead of, you know, purchasing an iPad. Somebody may, you know, we can get the same benefit out of an Android type of tablet. So just look at the try to project out your needs based on the populations that you're serving. Look at the needs of businesses and the consumer base that you have, and what how your consumers are moving through the rehab process and when these types of purchases may be needed. But that's a tough one. You know, the cost of devices, especially the latest and greatest newest technology, it's going to be up there. But then again, we have an obligation to serve our consumers and get them what it is that they need to be successful. So it's a balancing act. It's not easy. I don't have the answers to that, but again, it's a challenge that I think that we not only deal with in South Carolina, but I would bet that every single VR program deals with, as far as, you know, making sure that you get your consumers what it is that they need to be successful, but also having the funds to do so. If anybody has an answer to that, I'd love to hear it.
Sorry, mute again. I will say that, you know, when you think over the last 20 years, technology obviously has advanced, and we have so much technology out there. I can easily get very confused about it. But I do see the cost coming down a little bit. When you think about how much a laptop costs, you know, in 2000 versus 2020, definitely a decline in, you know, just a laptop, for example. So I think we're going to continue to see, you know, more competitive costs for assistive technology as companies continue to broaden their approach to individuals with disabilities and making sure they're included in their technology. But I see training. Felicia, you mentioned training, and I can't agree more. I mean, it's not just training staff, but like you said, training the employers, training the customer on what's out there and how to use it. Training to me is a key in this area, because the technology aspect changes. You know, every time you turn around, there's a new device, there's something that's different about it, and it's hard to keep up on top of all that. Cora, Joe, David, anything specific happening in your states on assistive technology that you would like to share?
Yeah, Allison, this is Joe. I really want to pick up on both of your comments, especially on the business side of this. So we are in the middle of a pretty significant evolution when it comes to the assistive technology. So if you think about what Microsoft is doing by building a lot of the assistive technology right into their suite of products, and the same thing is being done for Apple. So as a blind user, I just go in, turn the switches on, and, you know, have availability and accessibility. I think that's important on two fronts, particularly in the coming years. One is it removes some of the sort of mystery from the businesses in terms of installing software onto their systems. And two, it's at no cost, right? So I think as this continues to evolve, I think it's a sea change, at least on the front end of this, for businesses being more accepting and open to the use of the assistive technologies. You know, and clearly, you know, as it is with any other major change, it's not a light switch moment. So this will be something that will unfold, has been unfolding, and will unfold over the coming 3, 5, 7, 9 years or so.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I mean, I know you also use, you know, assistive technology, and no one, I think, would ever know that you are an individual who is blind if you don't have your video showing, because you are able to participate in anything that we do, just like, you know, we expect our customers to. So you're kind of lead by example, and that's a good thing with your assistive technology. So thank you very much for that. Let's move on a little bit for the sake of time. Cora, we've discussed the challenges and with staff retention among our community rehabilitation providers. Let's think about the services they provide to our customers to obtain competitive integrated employment. Particularly think about our most significant disability population and supported employment services. Do you see their role in this process increasing or changing in the future?
I would say yes to both of those questions, because I think in order for their role to increase, I think their role will change. I know, we've already talked about COVID-19, the pandemic, and how really it's challenged everybody in all aspects of our life, socially, politically, our personal lives, the economy. And of course, this includes individuals with disabilities. And I think as a result, the providers of employment services have been impacted by what has happened. And those providers are critical to the overall service delivery system. We need them. Providers like VR agencies and businesses, we found ourselves in a very unprecedented situation, and having to switch to virtual platforms as well as in-person services. And a huge factor has been that we have some of the individuals that we serve that have chosen to shelter at home and wait the pandemic out. They want to wait for things to open. And so moving forward, I think providers are going to have to develop service strategies that, encompass remote services as well as how to deliver services safely. One of the things that Felicia said earlier that really hit home with us is she had mentioned how dependent providers are on the funding that we provide. And I think that's been true during the pandemic. And, it all sounds really easy, but as I mentioned earlier, I don't think we really know the long-term effects. We know the short-term effects are there are lower referrals to employment providers, which has resulted in decreased revenue, causing financial shortfalls for them. And I think in some instances, the viability of their programs has been threatened. So I don't have all the answers here, but I think that, it's a great need for us that our providers are involved in collaborative efforts. And another thing I really liked what Felicia and David both said is that, you have to kind of look at the providers and what we want from them, what they're able to give to us, and then figure out how to do it and to do it well. And so I think it's going to take a collaborative effort on different groups nationally and on the local level to solve some of the issues moving forward.
Thank you, Cora. Any other panelists would like to talk about the CRP services and maybe the most significant populations? Everybody's getting quiet. We are kind of ending our time, so I'm going to focus this next little bit on a final topic of our employer engagement and business relations. When WIOA was passed in 2014, there was a large emphasis on our business engagement side, and we really have two customers now. We have the individual with a disability who we will continue to support to achieve their employment goals, but we also have the employer business side and services that we're providing to them. So thinking about our business side of the customer, what collaborations or changes have you all seen to increase that employer engagement, especially right now during this pandemic, and then what do you see that being in the future? And Joe, I'll start with you.
Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, David, go ahead. Well,
Go ahead, David.
Yeah.
Well, I figured I'd comment on, I think where we need to go in the future is to work within all the partners within our system, including the community rehab providers, to frankly avoid tripping over one another as we look to engage with employers. Employers are flooded with different agencies and entities reaching out to them, trying to place individuals within their businesses. To the extent that we can coordinate what we're doing and engage employers as a system, a holistic system that can meet a wide swath of their needs, it's just going to improve our outcomes. By consolidating and coming at them with a well thought out strategy to offer services, I think is probably the greatest thing that we could do to assist the employer community. With respect to continue work services or job retention services, in Connecticut, we faced a really big decision a couple years ago. We were about to implement an order of selection, which for those of you who may not be familiar, WIOA requires us to, when financial resources or capacity of the program is not going to be sufficient to serve all eligible individuals, we have to work with individuals with most significant disabilities first. There's some allowance to make a decision as to whether or not we would like to continue on with employment retention services along with the category of individual we're working with. And we in Connecticut decided that we were going to continue on with employment retention when implementing an order of selection. We thought that was critical because of the need to be able to address the needs of employers as a gateway for future consumers to be able to work within those businesses. Eliminating bias amongst the employers, increasing their level of comfort of hiring somebody with a disability is a really huge part in paving the way for the future. It's imperative that we demonstrate that the employer is going to receive the supports of our entire system should they hire someone, and by allowing us ourselves to continue to serve people even after they're placed into a job, or if an employer has an employee who needs something and they feel comfortable in coming to VR. I think it was very important for us and for the long term to make that decision. Thankfully, we've moved out of that order of selection, but we would have lost an awful lot of ground if we didn't make those decisions.
Yeah, and David, Florida, you know, when it went into the order selection and when WIOA came out and allowed that job retention aspect, we do that on our closed category, and it certainly is beneficial for those customers who have a job but need services in order to maintain that job. So it's a critical service, and we have a lot of individuals that we assist that way. Joe, Cora, Felicia?
So, Allison, this is Joe. A couple of things that I follow up with on what David said. I think we also have to recognize that the impact that has occurred to us as organizations has occurred to business, and they're doing business in a different way, and we have to appreciate and understand that. Some of the positive side to that is, for example, virtual interviews, but that means we have to scale up, you know, our talent consumers so that they're prepared for those interviews. But the other thing that is also, and David mentioned this earlier when he was talking about student services, we are now here in California exploring and piloting embedding counselors in large corporation major employers to do two things. One, help with, you know, the job retention as you have said, but the second one is really to align that counselor's skill set with what that business really needs. And we hope that that will expedite and make it easier for that corporation to give individuals with disabilities an opportunity to go into the job market, to go into their work. So we too are looking at different ways of thinking about how we engage by embedding that counselor, as I said, and then also by aligning caseloads by industry sector. Not just, you know, across all sectors, but somebody that can target, for example, the IT sector and be able to understand that skill set, what they're going to be looking for, how do you better prepare for it, how do you better interview for it, etc.
If I may, Allison, I'd like to also comment, one of the things that we've been very successful with are industry-specific training and placement programs. We've developed over 10 different training models within host employers here in Connecticut And it results in many people being placed within the host employer, but also building their skills so that they're transferable to other similar employers in the industry. We found that that's a great way to really interface with the employers and build up some pathways for the consumers to engage in.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, David. And a lot of our work experiences, all of the things that VR is doing, especially with the young population, is really focused on those industry sectors specific to your state. In Florida, hospitality is one of our big ones, and we have a lot of partners that we have collaborated with over especially the last few years with the student population. But definitely a lot of good things happening with our employer engagement. And, yeah, I think, David, you said that, the employers, they're bombarded all the time, do you have any openings? And we often hear from the employers, they want that one point of contact. They would like to have that one person that they could contact and say, hey, I've got 20 openings, help me fill these positions. And I think we can all certainly respect that as well. But this is, an opportunity with our workforce partners under WIOA to really collaborate together to work with those employers. And so that's definitely an opportunity that we saw from WIOA, and I think all the states are benefiting from that relationship as well. We have about 9 minutes left, and I know the panel's probably getting a little tired, but I'm going to throw one final question out there and just let you talk about anything you may have not been able to talk about today that you wanted to make sure and share with the audience. Is there any future emerging issues that you expect to be a part of the future of VR services?
I can make a comment on that, Allison.
Sure.
What we've learned dealing with this pandemic is that, and I'm going to use Joe's word, we have got to be nimble, not just as individual state programs, but as a VR community. I think I've heard on several different calls and several different panels that a lot of our programs were not equipped to telework. VR in South Carolina, our counselors have had laptops for years. But the reason we have laptops is because our counselors go to different itinerant sites. They go to the schools, they go to probation and parole, they go to, different places, and they have their laptop for that reason. But when the governor said to send everybody home, we had folks with their, just like, what are we supposed to do? We don't know how to work out of our house. We need to be in our office in order to be productive. So it really, made us shift and think that and figure out, not only can we be productive from a location other than our office, but we can also come up with new and innovative ways to serve our consumers. We don't have to do things like we've done them for the last 20, 30 years. And I think that, we've seen that locally here, in our states, but my hope is that is seen from a much larger scale, from a national level and a federal level, and that, things are put in place to help the VR programs to become more innovative, to look at our communities, to look at business, to look at schools, to see where they're going and help lead and guide the VR program so that we can make the shifts necessary to meet the needs of businesses and meet the needs of schools and meet the needs of the new workforce that would be more likely to come to a state agency that has an option of teleworking. I think it was Joe who said that, a large majority of your staff will be teleworking permanently, and that's great. I'm over here in the Southeast, and and it's kind of like, we got to get everybody back in those offices because that's the only way, they can be productive and get work done. So the challenge that I see is I think it's just going to take time for everything to kind of get near the same page, and we can realize that there are better ways to do things. You know, we need to use technology. We need to be more flexible. We need to be more innovative. And some of these changes may require legislative changes, but I feel like the VR program there will have to be some changes made from a legislative standpoint in order to help us to progress to this next level of innovation and serving our consumers, our business partners, and you know, getting the work done that we need to get done as VR employees.
All right, thank you, Felicia. Any other panelists would like to?
Yeah, Allison,
Yes, Joe.
I get really excited about this because there's a lot that happened with COVID-19. The loss of life and illness, nobody should ever discount. But COVID-19 accelerated a lot of things that were taking place. And for me, I see such tremendous possibilities in our near future. If you think about what's going on with technology, and not only that's already here, but what's coming when I think about artificial intelligence, I just see such potential opportunities for people with disabilities. And I think the challenge will be, is VR ready, willing, and able to lean in and embrace all those possibilities? And it's not just VR, it's all about partners, it's families, it's society. Just think about the fact that we're here on this virtual panel. Who would have thought this was possible a year ago? It's not this technology is not new, but we're using it in new ways. We're doing things with existing technology we never dreamed that we would be doing, or at least not doing it. So I am very hopeful. I think a lot of opportunity is going to materialize. But I would also say, as a VR profession, we need to embrace it and not fear it.
This is Dave. I'll be very brief, but I just want to jump on that point of the importance of technology and the role that it's going to play. One of the things I'm most grateful about was prior to the pandemic striking, late 2019, our department went through a complete technology refresh, and we outfitted all of our staff with remote capability. Everyone packing a lightweight laptop, virtual private network capability to access networks, and really all the tools necessary to telework and serve individuals remotely. Despite having all of the hardware, it was the wetware of our own staff that was one of the biggest stumbling blocks as we transitioned from working in our offices to a full remote situation, which we're still in 8 months later. What we found is that there is big gaps between what many of our staff are capable of in working remotely and those who have not embraced it. So I think raising the baseline level of functionality amongst our own staff is going to be critical in modeling to consumers that we're working with in a remote way and encouraging them to be able to use technology to the fullest extent to engage not only with us, but the world around them. We started the practice of purchasing tablets for consumers to engage with us along with Wi-Fi capabilities to allow the connectivity necessary to work with us. So we're trying to go at this very aggressively, but the lesson learned here is that we need to take the time to invest in our staff so that they can use the tools that they have available.
Thank you, David. It is 2:29, so I want to thank our panel experts, Cora, David, Felicia, and Joe, for spending some time with us today to share your thoughts about the future of VR. I know the pandemic has, made it necessary for the public VR program to be flexible and, change the way we have traditionally served our customers. We've learned a lot through this pandemic that many of our services, they actually can be conducted virtually, and we are seeing success, in this approach for our customers. However, we also know that not all of our customers have the ability to connect virtually, and that population will always need the more traditional approach to better assist them. So, I started this panel discussion talking about the individualized approach that VR is proud to support, and allowing greater flexibility, especially during this pandemic, has allowed that individual approach to expand our service delivery and outreach. So I want to end this panel discussion with a quote from a very near and dear favorite colleague of mine. It's not verbatim, so he may have to correct me, but this is the gist of it. Never miss an opportunity to improve, even during a crisis. And Barry, I want to thank you and the Southeast ADA Center for allowing us to have this discussion today, and I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Allison, and thank you to our entire panel, Cora, Joe, Felicia, David, and then again, especially Allison for leading the discussion. As a former employee of Oak Rehab, I just found the discussion fascinating, and I think the future of VR is very bright. So to our folks listening today, I want to thank you again for participating in this webinar, Future Images of the Face of Vocational Rehabilitation. This is the final of our 4 events in the virtual series, Disability Employment Looking Back and Moving Forward. As a reminder, a certificate of completion is available for this webinar. To receive the certificate, you must meet 4 requirements. Number 1, you have to have been registered for this webinar. Number 2, you must have listened to all of this webinar. Number 3, your attendance to this entire webinar must be verified. And you must complete the online multiple choice post-test for this webinar. If you've joined us for previous webinars in this series, you know that we insert an Easter egg somewhere in the questions. And the Easter egg this week, Marcia, there she is. Isn't she beautiful? This is Allison Flanagan's dog, Rosie. And she may just show up as a test question. So isn't she something? After you
brought back to Kentucky last weekend when she gave me a look like, seriously, we got to sit here for 10 hours.
After you submit the post-test and verify your attendance, you'll be provided with a link to print your certificate of completion. A copy of the certificate will also be sent to the email address you provided when accessing the post-test for this webinar. Your feedback's very important to us, as always. We appreciate your input. We always are looking for ways to improve these webinars and identify future topics of interest. So please reach out to us. The link to the post-test and the evaluation for the webinar will be emailed to all registration participants within the next couple of hours. This webinar, along with all materials in the 4-event series, will be archived with recording, transcript, and presentation. We encourage your colleagues and friends to share the link to the archive of this series. That link is adasoutheast.org/webinars/archives.php. Thank you again for being with us for this webinar in the 4-part series in celebration of NDEAM National Disability Employment Awareness Month, as well as the 30th anniversary of the ADA and the 100th anniversary of VR. And finally, if you have questions about your rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, you may contact your regional ADA center at 1-800-949-4232, or in the Southeast, you can call us directly at 404-541-9001, or you can email us at adasoutheast@law.syr.edu. Remember, all calls and all emails are free and they're confidential. So thanks again. Join us next month. We will have a webinar on protecting your mental health during the pandemic and the holidays. See you then.